We all know that one day, before we know it, our life will come to a stop. We don't know how or when, but the Grim Reaper is sure to find us when it is our time to transition to the mysterious hereafter. Surprisingly, some people have managed to escape from the Reaper's bullseye when it seemed like their destiny had reached its final destination. So in no particular order, here is the following list of lucky humans who amazingly managed to cheat death against all odds. Phineas Gage. On September 13, 1848, Phineas Gage, while working as a railway worker, was packing a hole with gunpowder, adding a fuse and sand, and then packing the charge down with a large tamping iron. The gunpowder ignited and the iron bar shot through his left cheekbone and exited out the top of his head. Despite the accident that for anyone else would have been a sure death, Gage was able to get up after just a couple of minutes and incredibly started walking. Sadly, a few days later he had fungus of the brain. Then a couple of weeks after, 8 fluid ounces of pus from an abscess under his scalp was released. Damage to Gage's frontal cortex had resulted in a complete loss of social inhibitions, which often led to inappropriate behavior. He was no longer the same Gage that his friends and family knew, but either way, he had managed to escape death. Today, his skull and the iron bar that shot through it are on display at Boston's Warren Anatomical Museum. Maria Hernandez. Richard Ramirez killed at least 13 people in little over a year in the mid-80s. Which pretty much solidifies that he is really good at murder, and earned him the nickname as the Night Stalker. One night, Ramirez encountered Maria Hernandez and followed her to her apartment. Hernandez turned around when she heard noises behind her, which Ramirez took as his cue to shoot her in the face. But when he fired his gun, the bullet was blocked by the car keys that Hernandez was incredibly still holding. Despite suffering only a broken finger, Hernandez dropped to the floor and played dead. After delivering a few good kicks to what he believed to be a corpse just for fun, Ramirez stepped over Hernandez and entered her apartment, where her roommate met a decidedly less fortunate fate. Hernandez got up and managed to get to the front of the building right as Ramirez was leaving the apartment. And for some weird reason, Ramirez chose not to kill her. Maybe he thought he was seeing a ghost. But either way, this turned out to be a bad move, as Hernandez's testimony later helped secure him a one-way trip to the gas chamber. Roy C. Sullivan. No one is worried about getting struck by lightning since the chances of it are very slim, but the chances of being struck by lightning twice on different days is seemingly impossible. So what are the odds of being struck by lightning 7 times? With our world record holder, Roy Sullivan, the events happened as follows. In 1942, Sullivan was hit for the first time when he was in a lookout tower. The lightning bolt struck him in a leg and he lost a nail on his big toe. Then, in 1969, the second bolt hit him in his truck when he was driving on a mountain road. It knocked him unconscious and burned his eyebrows. 1970, the third strike burned his left shoulder while in his front yard. 1972, the next hit happened in a ranger station. The strike set his hair on fire. After that, he began to carry a pitcher of water with him. 1973, a lightning bolt hit Sullivan on the head, blasted him out of his car and again set his hair on fire. 1974, Sullivan was struck by the 6th bolt in a campground, injuring his ankle. 1977, the 7th and final lightning bolt hit him when he was fishing. Sullivan was hospitalized for burns in his chest and stomach. This makes Roy one of the most electrifying humans I have ever read about. The Robertson Family. It sounds like a fantasy story from a classic adventure novel, but this was the reality for the Robertson family from Staffordshire while on a voyage around the world during the 1970s. In 1970, retired merchant Navy officer Dougal Robertson was running a dairy farm at Meerbrook near Leek with his family. Douglas lived in a very isolated situation, and to offset, he thought it would be a good idea to take his family around the world in a boat to educate his children in the University of Life. On January 27, 1971, the family departed from Falmouth in Cornwall on board a 13-meter wooden schooner called Lucette, which they had bought with their life savings after selling the farm. Over the next year and a half, the family sailed across the Atlantic, stopping at various Caribbean ports, but 17 months into their voyage, while on the Pacific Ocean, the boat was struck by a pod of killer whales near the Galapagos Islands. They were forced to scramble on board an inflatable life raft and dingy due to the boat's damages. The moment they set sail on the raft, they were beset with problems. With little food and water, which only survived for 6 days, they had to catch rainwater in containers and hunt turtles and fish to eat. Turtle was the mainstay of their diet. They drank its blood when they had no water, they dried its meat and rationed it and stored it up. They also rendered the fat down in the sun to make oil, which they rubbed on their skin and drank to keep them warm. The inflatable raft became unusable after 16 days, so the 6 people crowded into the 3-meter long dinghy called the Ednemeyer had to take turns to sit in the dry part of the boat. Finally, after 38 days of grueling survival in their little raft, they were finally picked up after a Japanese fishing boat spotted their distress flare. So the next time you consider being a castaway and traveling around the world, you might want to remember this story and think twice before sailing off. Vesna Vulovic. It was 26 days into 1972 when 22-year-old flight attendant Vesna Vulovic found herself at 33,000 feet in the air and quickly descending to the earth without a parachute. Jet flight JU-367 had been cruising over Erzbavska Karmanice, now the Czech Republic, when an explosion occurred. The terrorist group Croatian National Movement was named as responsible for the deaths of all but one, and as astonishing as it sounds, Vesna Vulovic survived with a fractured skull, 2 broken legs and 3 broken vertebrae, which left her temporarily paralyzed from the waist down. She regained the use of her legs after surgery and continues to fly sporadically. She holds the Guinness World Record for the highest free fall. Aron Ralston. Aron Lee Ralston, born on October 27, 1975, is an American outdoorsman and mechanical engineer that during a solo descent of Blue John Canyon in southeastern Utah, he dislodged a boulder, pinning his right wrist to the side of the canyon wall. After 5 days, he was able to amputate his arm with a dull pocket knife, make his way through the rest of the canyon, rappel down a 65-foot drop, and hike 7 miles to safety. The incident is documented in Ralston's autobiography, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, and is the subject of the 2010 film 127 Hours, where he is portrayed by James Franco. Aron, to this day, despite the accident, keeps on cheating death by mountaineering and became the first person to ascend all of Colorado's 14-year solo in winter. Ann Hodges. Imagine relaxing in your living room like any other normal day when all of a sudden a meteoroid crashes through your roof unexpectedly. Well, believe it or not, in 1954 in Alabama, Ann Hodges was napping on her living room couch when a grapefruit-sized meteoroid crashed through her roof and ricocheted off her large wooden console radio before it struck her on the arm and hip. She was badly bruised but able to walk. The Air Force arrived and took the meteorite from her. Ann's husband, Eugene, hired a lawyer to get it back. Then the landlord claimed it, wanting to sell it in order to cover the damage done to the roof. By the time the meteorite was returned to Ann and Eugene over a year later, public attention had diminished, and they were unable to find a buyer willing to pay much for the 8.5-pound alien rock. Against her husband's wishes, Ann donated it to the Alabama Museum of Natural History. Ben Carpenter. When crossing the street in Paw Paw, Ben Carpenter, 21 years old and wheelchair-bound, was picked up accidentally by a truck. He was pushed by the semi-truck for 4 miles at 50 miles per hour after the arms of his wheelchair got stuck in the grill. The story goes that the driver had stopped at a red light and couldn't see Carpenter crossing in front of him. The light changed and Carpenter ended up having the ride of a lifetime. What I learned is that I never would want to be a Hollywood celebrity, Carpenter said, after all the fuss being made by TV and newspapers. Well, what we can learn from Ben and his crazy ride is that despite these horrible situations, you can at least have your 5 minutes of fame. Michael Benson. In 1992, Benson and his colleague Chris Duddy were shooting aerial footage of Hawaii for a movie when their helicopter crashed over Kilauea, the world's most active volcano. The cameraman and pilot Craig Hosking plunged inside the volcano crater, narrowly missing the boiling lava pool. While Hosking and Duddy were able to reach safety over the next day, rescuers struggled to locate Benson amid the noxious fume clouds. Benson spent 2 sleepless nights inside the crater, listening to the sound of the lava bubbling below, before he was able to reach a rescue net that had been dropped through the thick fog. Isidro Mejia. Isidro Mejia suffered a rather unfortunate accident when he was doing construction work on the roof of a house when he fell. Luckily, the fall didn't kill him, but the 6 3.5-inch nails that accidentally shot into his neck and skull certainly should have. He was able to survive because the nails barely missed his brainstem and spinal cord. Mejia told authorities he remembered a shock to the back of his neck and little else before passing out. The doctors that attended Mejia said they did not have too much hope that he would survive, but luckily he did. Mejia is walking with minimal assistance and speaks somewhat slowly because his brain speech center was affected, but his progress has been remarkable, and with rehabilitation therapy he should be fully recovered. We hope you enjoyed our list of the luckiest people who managed to cheat death. While we can't stop this train called life, this list proves we should never lose hope in the worst situations that could potentially end our journey short on this place called Earth.